Don't listen to them, though. And the other thing is, the doctors don't even get 1 minute's training on nutrition, and yet 50% of the questions you ask your doctor on nutrition, he doesn't have 1 minute's formal education. Not 1 minute. Dr. Reich said, what makes me so powerful is the fact I'm not a doctor, I'm a scientist. He said, if you were a doctor, you would have no education. And it is true. And qualifications don't count. What qualifications count the most? I was in Toronto giving a talk, and a doctor stood up and said, have you ever had cancer? I said, no. Then how can you talk about it? What are your qualifications? He said, I'm from the Harvard School of Medicine. I've done this, I've done this. He said, what are your qualifications? And I said, well, I don't have your qualifications, doctor. I haven't killed 1,000 people. I have saved 1,000 people, but I haven't killed 1,000. There's all kinds of qualifications. You're qualified to be a mother. You're qualified to be a scientist. This qualification thing is a way to dismiss argument because they can't argue. They're not intelligent enough to argue, so they try to dismiss argument. Kill the carrier, and you won't have to get the message. That's their philosophy. Call names. If you can't argue, call them a quack. Call them a snake oil salesman. Anyways, I had a doctor, head of the AMA, call me up when I wrote the book, The Calcium Factor. You see, 54 other doctors called me up and said it was the best book they ever read, but that if they endorse it, they lose their license. This doctor said, what makes you think I won't throw you in jail for practicing medicine without a license? And I said, what I do is I educate the people on what the scientific community are saying about nutrition and disease. And now you classify that as the practice of medicine. And I said, if it is the practice of medicine, when are you doctors going to start practicing medicine? He said, they said you'd have all the answers, slammed the phone in my ear, and I haven't heard from them since. And I take no money from any man because I don't want to hear from them. That's the bottom line. Now, I've saved the best for last. And that was because in 1982, we were really mesmerized by the fact that if all these cultures are at high level, above 8,000 feet, how can you have 4 million Japanese at sea level, not sick, no cancer, with the same symptoms? But as soon as we went in and looked at the calcium factor, we found it was constant. You see, Okinawa is about 327 islands, about 157 of them are inhabited, and they are islands of coral reefs. Coral reefs are calcium carbonate, so they live on an island of calcium. When the calcium weathers, you get calcium in the air, calcium in your hair, calcium is everywhere, and they even eat it. So 540 some years ago, they discovered that when the chickens pecked at the coral reefs, they would have twice as many eggs, and the eggs were delicious. They found that when the cows licked the reefs, they would have twice as much milk, and it was delicious. And so they started looking at that, and all reefs would disintegrate when they weather, and it drops off and forms what we call coral sand. In Hawaii, these sands get washed out to the ocean by the big wave action. But in Okinawa, they don't have the wave action, so they just drop down. Well, these Japanese started digging them up and feeding them to the chickens who had twice as many eggs. They fed them to the cows who had twice as much milk, and then they put them on their crops, and some of their crops went up 300% more rice. And at some point there, Grandma, give it to Grandpa, because within a few years, they record Exodus. Now, the Japanese are educated. They're like us. They have university education. They record their history well. Exodus was the year that all medical doctors left Okinawa because no one was sick. 533 years ago, they all left Okinawa. They call it Exodus. No one was sick. Now, it didn't go unnoticed. Our early explorers discovered this Garden of Eden. They discovered the coral, and they filled their ship holds with coral. Now, you can go to Barcelona, Spain today, and they have a historic monument called the world's first drugstore, the very first building that dispensed drugs. And up and down every aisle is the words coral calcium, Okinawa, Japan. Doctors dispensed it. The doctors of the day wrote that it cured cancer, cured diabetes, cured all diseases. The doctors of the day wrote. It was the first drug prescribed in a drugstore, and it wasn't a drug. It's one of God's natural nutrients. Now, the Japanese culture for 4,000 years has been saying, the islands of Okinawa shall cure the world, and nobody knows about it. There's millions of tons of this stuff. They're shipping it around the world. Mainland Japan has got it now. There's 17 million Japanese take it every day. They want to grow to be 105 with no disease. 44 million Chinese, millions of people in Sweden, France, Germany, England are taking coral calcium. It's gone there long before America. It's finally come to the United States, and there's only about 250,000 people taking it. But that leads to some pretty big disasters because, you see, 50% of the people that take it will stand up and give you a testimonial. And you're going to find this. Once you start taking the coral, people will talk to you about what happened. I've seen literally hundreds of people with terminal cancer that are cured. Heart disease cured. High blood pressure, oh, that's easy. Cured in usually 2 or 3 weeks, it's gone. But I had a girl in Detroit with lupus. She was terminal lupus. She was given 3 months to live, and she just had a baby. She was 27 years old. She was crying at the first meeting. 3 months later, she was up at the front telling how they can't find any lupus anymore. And she went on coral calcium. I had a girl in Denver, leap up on the stage, kiss me because of the calcium factor. When she was 13, she got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and was put in a wheelchair, and she got progressively worse. Till finally, 22 years later, she couldn't even move her hands. That's when her friends told her, what are you going to do? Wait till you can't move anything? Or are you going to do something different? She read the calcium factor. 6 months later, she was walking. 9 months later, she was running 9 miles a day. Now, she's a living being, and you can talk to her. Her name is Coral. Spelt the same. Coral Markle is her name. And I said to the audience at the time, we've had a multiple sclerosis patient, crippled, that now runs on calcium. Has anybody ever heard of anything like that? And the guy behind her stood up and said, I have. He identified himself as a medical doctor, a neurologist from Connecticut, and he had 10 years ago been crippled in a wheelchair, couldn't do surgery. He now got up, did a jig, showed us his medical records, and does surgery every day. He was on coral. Holy cow. I mean, and since that time I've seen dozens of people who were crippled that now run. Well, there are so many stories. Name a disease, they'll be telling you about it. And it's 50% of the people, because the people who take it are taking it because there's something wrong, or they're terrified, or, and as soon as they have this hope, look out. I'm going to be on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and there's going to be 50 million Americans learning about coral overnight. You wait and see. It's going to happen. They can't stop us. It's international. Russian doctors are prescribing coral calcium to all their patients. Did you know that? In Germany, they're prescribing coral calcium to their patients. Medical doctors are doing this. It's going to happen in America, too. American doctors will be, in the next century, prescribing coral calcium to all their people. It's a piece of the Garden of Eden. See, that coral also has 60 other elements: copper, chromium, yttrium, selenium. It's got everything in it. And the more you have, the better you are. Coral calcium has praseodymium and yttrium. And they did scientific studies on praseodymium and yttrium. And you know what they discovered? They discovered that all the animals that eat praseodymium and yttrium doubled their lifespan. They lived twice as long. And they did dozens of animals. And when I found that out in 1982, I said to myself, boy, I'm going to take praseodymium and yttrium. My wife's going to take it. My kids are going to take it. My friends and family. Everybody in the world, I'm going to give yttrium to. My goal, my dream, and I have a dream, and that is to wake up one day to an America disease-free, no cancer, no diabetes, no heart disease. My grandchildren are not going to be suffering the ravages of cancer, diabetes, multiple sclerosis, because they don't need to. We know how today to cure the world. We're just not allowed to do it. So you people, they can't throw you all in jail for curing yourself, so why don't you start with yourselves, cure your friends, cure your families, and it'll spread like wildfire. God bless you all.